Okay, so there's something we need to talk about here. I don't know what the hell happened, but this finale was something to say the least. The season starts off with Legoshi trying to find Tem's murder, a plot line finally being expanded upon since season 1. They introduce this Cobra guy, and we'll get back to that in a minute. However, throughout the season, we start to delve into Legoshi's inner turmoil with being a carnivore. He wants to be perceived as less of a threat to others. I get that motivation, that makes sense. What doesn't make sense is at the end of episode 12, and we'll get there in a minute. But before we do, I'm just going to run through what happened in this season to kind of bring us to how we got to this conclusion. Because few things kind of contradict themselves even within the last few episodes, and I really don't understand what happened. Throughout the show, Legoshi, to me at least, gets perceived as this savior type. He wants to save everyone, including herbivores, and he wants to change the name of carnivores by also reforming himself. And that makes sense. This can also be seen as a flaw, although the writer doesn't really explicitly go into how this can be seen as a flaw, because the writer kind of makes it seem as if this type of character trait is just okay for Legoshi to have, and honestly, he needs to understand that he can't save everyone, but for some reason, the writer doesn't ever have Legoshi come to this conclusion, so he still has this savior complex, even at the end of season 2. So it doesn't really make sense, because it's not seen as a flaw, it's just seen as one of his character traits. However, because of that, it leads to Legoshi getting involved in things that lead to more turmoil for him. For example, the reason why he can't be with Haru is because he believes he needs to become stronger as a carnivore and as a man for her, which makes sense. However, his ideology of becoming stronger is like, I've got to protect all the herbivores and I've got to become strong in this like now physical sense, and in some ways just impossible way for him to be able to become that strong. And it seems to me like an unattainable goal that he needs to come to realize. However, because of that, it's kind of just coming off as a savior complex for no reason. So the biggest reveal of the season, of course, is who actually killed Tem, and Legoshi finds that because he discovers that he knows the same taste of the saliva as the killer of Tem when he gets into a fight earlier back in the season. So because of this, he confronts Riz, of course, instead of going to the police, which again, I don't really understand. It seems the writer establishes that Tem's death is somehow Legoshi's fight without actually making the connection between the two. So his motivation for doing this feels really forced to me. Aside from him being the savior, that's the only reason I can see him feeling he needs to save everyone by fighting Riz, but other than that, I really don't understand his motivation this deeply with Tem's case, especially since they weren't established as friends. I also don't want to completely shit on the show because aside from the huge flaws that were at the end of this season, I do want to talk about the good parts of it, and I do like how they do characterize Riz. I do like how they give us a backstory that he establishes a strong bond with Tem in the past and eventually stops taking his medication that suppresses his strength because he believes he is able to be around herbivores and he is able to be perfectly fine. However, we return to the beginning of the show, the very first scene, where we see Tem being murdered, and this time we're given context as to what actually happened that night. Riz rips Tem's arm and frightened as hell he runs away from Riz. Of course he would, because he's scared for his life at this point. He had told him that he stopped taking his medication. He's scared as all hell and runs away, of course. Riz chases after him to the auditorium, where he eventually catches up and devours him because the blood triggers his instinctual rage. Then he deludes himself, Riz that is, thinking that he and Tem have become one, and that Tem actually wanted to be murdered, that he wanted to be eaten. And this is how we do sympathize for Riz, because we see that he just wanted a companion, and we see that he wanted someone to actually understand him, and he wanted to be understood by not only carnivores, but he wanted to be understood by herbivores because he wanted to be seen as anything more than just a monster. But then after doing that, he deludes himself because he doesn't want to believe that's what he had become. And it's really tragic, and I like that story. However, the rushed conclusion of that, and we'll get into the details in a minute, is really where we start to have the issues with the season. And it's not just like minor issues. To me, they feel like really major story execution issues that really need to be cleared up, or the story's gonna even fall further as we go on. I also like how this is very similar to what happens to people when they stop taking medication that is helping them with functioning in daily society. They show how over time Riz starts to believe that he's better, even though the medication is actually the thing that's making him better, and he has this false belief that they are becoming better and they no longer need it. I do realize it's not exactly the same. Of course, we're talking about animals and a fictional show. The comparisons are there, and I do think that's what the author was alluding to some extent. I also liked Lewis's development this season. We really get to see the struggle with being an herbivore and wanting to prove his strength, which is why he becomes the leader of the Shishigami group, which is lions. So in this case, he wants to prove his strength to them and prove his worth, because he's constantly feeling abandoned and he doesn't feel like he even is worthy to anyone. And I do even like, and even though it is tragic and sad, how he feels he has to force himself to eat meat to prove himself to the group. It's just so equally sad and tragic, and I like how Ibuki really does catch on to that really quickly, and I like how their relationship does develop from that. But we will get back to Ibuki in a few minutes because he is going to be playing a role. I'm really not gonna lie, I have to admit that I was definitely more invested in Lewis's side than Legoshi's at times, because Legoshi's arc kind of seemed to be getting old and really going nowhere. I mean, the whole arc where he feels like he has to kind of prove his strength, and the whole Haru shit I don't really care about. I'm sorry, I don't really like Haru, and please don't attack me for that, but I just really can't stand her. I don't think she plays really any vital role to the show, as you can clearly tell. Does anybody even care that she's in it? They put her in the opening like she's the person that matters, and she doesn't at all. She's barely in the fucking show. And then when she comes in, it's just I love you, Legoshi, and then it's like, I don't feel this connection anywhere. It comes out of nowhere, and I just don't like her. Anyway, back to Lewis. I really just appreciated this whole arc of just really delving into him and his abandonment issues, and his arc seemed a lot more relatable to me than Legoshi, who has this savior complex, like I said. And not saying you can't like a character, about for more than relatability, but at the same time, it's like you love those characters that you do relate to, and it's just Legoshi just doesn't really, I don't really relate to him as much, because he just feels like the main character that has to save everyone else, and I want him to be going through more than that, and I want him to be doing stuff for him, and it feels like his motivations are completely for other people. Why do I want to be a better carnivore? I want to be a better carnivore for Haru. I want to be a better carnivore for Lewis or whoever else. I want to save herbivores. What does he want instinctually? And that's what I really want to cover, so I hope it gets better. I haven't read the manga, so I really don't know. Another thing, again, like I said, his motivation for solving Tem's case is never really made clear to me, other than he wanted to. Yeah, they indicated that they kind of spoke in the past, but I don't really understand why Legoshi is so invested in this case, other than main character Itis, and the fact that he has to be the one to be involved in it just because, other than the fact that there have been times when he is literally told to go to the police and he doesn't. And I just don't really understand, like I said, other than just having the main character have this big battle out fight.
By all accounts, it doesn't make sense.
When I don't really think the fighting is really what makes Beastars a good show, and I don't really think it needs to compete with other shonen, because it has these other elements that make it unique on its own. So it's just aggravating that the show felt like it needed to do that, because it needed to somehow compete with other shonen to outdo itself from last season, when it really didn't need to. It wasn't even in the show that the police had put the case on the back burner or something. It seemed like the show had put the thing on the back burner until this season. So it doesn't really make sense to me why Legoshi wants to do any of this. It just feels like he's just doing it because he's the main character and it has to be him. Another thing, why didn't Legoshi go to the police? He spouts this nonsense to Lewis about it being his duty to go against Riz, but why? That was never made entirely clear, except that he wants to just be strong and actually like fight against him. And I would kind of like it if in the show it was treated as a flaw, like everybody else was condemning him for it, like, no, go to the police, this isn't your role, you shouldn't do this. But everybody treats it like this is Legoshi's part to play, and it's not. Like I said, it's just another way for him to have this main character syndrome that's really just not needed. So if someone can explain it to me, I really want to understand why Legoshi needs to have this huge role in this when he went to the police and caused all this drama to be avoided. Again, it would have been really fun to play into his flaws of wanting to appear strong and save others, but it doesn't feel like it's a flaw in this. It just feels like a character trait that everybody else feeds into, and that's not a strong enough motivation for me to feel like he needs to involve himself with this. Also, what happened to the Cobra guy? He was in it for like a few episodes in the beginning and then he just disappeared. He was the one that was investigating this whole thing as well, and it just seemed like he was never brought up again. Even after Legoshi finds out it was Riz, they just completely forget that he was involved in this whole thing. Can someone please explain to me why I felt so underwhelmed by this season finale as well? And now we're finally at episode 12, which is, for me, such an underwhelming and rushed finale to overall a really well explained and well detailed arc. The way episode 11 ends, you feel on the edge of your seat, especially to those who have yet to read the manga. So imagine my dismay to watch episode 12. Ibuki gives Lewis an ultimatum, and what the fuck, why? It just feels like he dies for no reason. And if you don't believe me, there are other people that actually agree that there was no reason for him to die, and that no one feels emotionally invested in this fucking thing. And also, I understand that the ending is really beautiful and it does tell a great narrative. However, they can't expect me to just infer that that's part of the story. You need to show that to me in the actual show. And I really would have liked if they would have shown more of Ibuki and his relationship with Lewis before they just decided to hurriedly kill him off, because of course they had to, because it's a season finale and because it would make a great dramatic plot point. I also feel like the relationship could have been built up a little bit more than what we really had, so we could have felt the emotional weight. And I felt it was kind of toxic for Ibuki to give him this ultimatum, even though in the episode previously he contradicts exactly what he says about, if I ever lose myself, then kill me. But then he's telling him because Lewis wants to go back, it's like now it's like Lewis's fault, so now he has to make the choice to end it. It just feels like really selfish and fucked up and twisted to me, and not even in a good way. Then we have to get to the real meat of this video. Anyway, Legoshi takes it upon himself to fight Riz instead of going to the police, like I've mentioned 100 times before, because I think that's really stupid that he didn't just go to the police. He hopes that Lewis will show up for him. I just have to say that Legoshi and Lewis are so much better in this whole fucking thing than Legoshi and Haru. But we get a good scene in episode 12 where Lewis doesn't want Legoshi to go back and fight Riz because he doesn't want to lose anyone else. He keeps back these tears, and it's a really great scene. I thought this was such a heartwarming scene because, again, we know that Lewis has held back his feelings since childhood of being abandoned, and he doesn't want to lose anyone else. I think it's really great. I think this was executed very well. I really loved it, and I thought, okay, the Ibuki thing was rushed, but maybe we can still save this. And then Lewis says this.
Okay.
You serious?
So yeah, that happens, and not only does Lewis suggest this, but Legoshi actually does this. Excuse me? Weren't we just in the last episode saying how Legoshi should respect all life? How does eating one's foot respect someone's life? And I understand it's because Lewis told him in this really like noble way to give him strength because, you know, he has to eat meat to apparently unlock this Super Saiyan mode or something. I really just think it contradicts everything that Legoshi just built up to, and I'm just really upset that this is how they decided to end this whole thing. And it's just really, really, really dumb. And it's like, doesn't even bother me that Lewis suggests it because it makes sense in his point of view, because he looks at it like he's giving something to Legoshi. This sacrifice means something to him, and it makes sense why he would suggest for him to do that. But from Legoshi's point of view, to do it just because he wanted to, that doesn't make any fucking sense. And also, what the fuck is going on with Goku Legoshi right now? What the hell? So, yeah, he eats Lewis's foot, and this makes him transform into this werehog looking thing, because of course it does. This apparently gives him the strength to fight Riz, and it feels completely forced. It would have been much better if Legoshi said no, even though Lewis is offering, because the fact that he said yes just really kind of just defeats the point of him developing this whole strength against having to eat meat. And it just really doesn't understand why that would be the first thing that Legoshi has to go to for strength. Wouldn't him refusing to and finding within himself the strength to do it without eating meat be the better solution? But they had to do that because Deus Ex Machina, of course. And they, like I said, they wanted this really action-y scene. And it really just didn't need to happen. And because it did happen, it still happened in a very unsatisfying and, for me, very shoehorned way. And I know the writer can do better than this. I just think that they had a chance to fix the issues with the manga, and they didn't, and that sucks. And I'm really disappointed to see it end in such an unsatisfying way. But at least I know I'm not the only one that thinks this way. Overall, Beastars started off great, had a great middle, but then towards the end started to become rushed, because I think that the conclusion for these arcs just wanted to be finished as fast as possible, and there really wasn't much thought into how to conclude it other than just getting it done very quickly. I don't know the whole thing behind the scenes, and I don't really want to make any speculations because of it, but I just want to say what my issues were with this, because it could have been better, and I just wish it was, because Beastars honestly was the best thing this season, and it just sucks to see it end in such a contrived way. So yeah, that's my little bit on this whole finale and how it ended and all that. I'm glad that things are concluded, not glad the way they got concluded, but we'll have to see how things get from here. Hopefully it can pick up, or it will get worse. Anyway, I hope you stay till the end, and see you in the next one.